it would come out and destroy the monarchy and destroy the Hanoverian, well, the House of Windsor. And I think she's put her family's interest, the dynasty of Windsor, over the national interest. And she's gambling that, no, the Brexit thing will die over. They'll all buckle down and be good feudal subjects again. No, ma'am, they won't. You know, these Celtic fringes are really upset and riled by Brexit, and you gambled on the wrong side. It's like, you know, you understand horse racing, ma'am. You put your money on the wrong horse. You put on the Brexit horse, it's going to come down. It's got 3 fences to cross: Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. And it's going to, you know, it's going to fall at these fences. You should have put your money on freedom and constitutional monarchy, which means that we, the people, have the right to tell you what to do. And the final analysis, you as monarch don't have the right to tell me what to do. It's the other way round. And you can't fiddle democracy forever. Eventually, the will of the people will triumph. And, you know, if you're pitting yourself for Brexit against the actual will of the people, I'm afraid you're going to lose. And your dynasty is not worth saving, because it's a compromised and a corrupt dynasty. That's what's, you know, I'm sorry, but any kind of real analysis is beginning to show this. And I'm very sad, because I've always been a loyal, supporter of Britain's constitutional monarchy. But like John Locke said, there are times when the people have the right to resist the monarchy. When the monarchy becomes a disruptive, totalitarian force, pushing its will against their interests, the people have a right to resist. That was the basis of John Locke's liberal philosophy. And I'm with Locke on this. You know, he spent years in Holland brooding over this, along with Sir William Temple, who was a very great intellectual at the time, and the ambassador from Britain to Holland. They reluctantly came to the view that actually, yes, the people have the right to choose the monarch. And if the monarch is misbehaving and corrupt and doing the wrong thing, it's time for the people to get active. I'm coming reluctantly to that position. I'm glad to see Charles is peeping his head over the parapet, and he's just been to Bethlehem, where I've been also several times. Charles, you're a bit late. You know, I was there in, 95, having that experience, walking about, meeting people, and realising, gosh, these people miss us. You know, they miss the British sense of fair play. They've been bombed, trashed, I mean, absolutely abhorrently treated by this fearful, sad, paranoid Israeli armed occupying force. You know, the poor old Israeli kids that have to go out and walk the streets of Bethlehem. I mean, I met a Palestinian boy, Saeed, early 20s, who told me personally, we were chatting as we walked around, he said his best friend and him were out taking a stroll one evening in the streets of Bethlehem when an Israeli patrol stopped them, armed soldiers, and demanded their identity papers, which they have to carry at all times. His friend didn't have them, they were at home. And he said, you know, sort of protested, like, why do I need them and all that? And the Israeli guy shot him dead, you know, for causing trouble. Bang, bang, the guy's dead, right? And my friend that I met, Saeed, was utterly, you know, beyond shocked. I mean, let's say you're out walking the streets of Brighton late at night, and a cop car pulls over and, you know, demands your identity papers. I mean, they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't get away with it. But imagine we end up Brexit Britain, they've got the power to do that. You know, are you some foreign European citizen, you know? And then you don't have them, you've left them at home, and then they shoot you cold dead. And they get away with it. You know, and that's what's going on, you know, recently in the streets of Bethlehem. Unbelievable. So Charles, I hope you've had a good lesson. You know, did you meet Saeed? Did he tell you that? Because, you know, I've been trying to get a genuine dialogue going between Israel, Palestine, and other neighbouring countries for peace. Because I love Israel. I love my Jewish friends. I also love Palestine and my Palestinian friends. And I want truth and justice to prevail for both of them, which can only come about through a healing circle of dialogue. So thank you, Charles, for finally going there and sticking your head above the parapet. Like I say, that's about, you know, 20 years overdue, but better late than never. So, yeah, and I think the Queen should have stopped Brexit and abdicated, if not. and Charles should become king and deal with it. Because otherwise, I mean, I think he has the intelligence to see what I'm saying is actually true. And I think he also has the intellectual courage to act on it. Okay, so now I just want to mention John Bercow, because he has recently been appointed Professor of Politics at my old university, University of London. So congratulations, John, well done, at the college that my mother was a graduate of. And he'll make a great, political science professor. So congratulations. I think he's also right when he's come out and said that if only the Lib Dems and Labour had worked together, and the Greens, we could have stopped this Brexit. There was no need for that general election. And he rightly points out it was a sort of fantasy or chimera, largely in the brain of Joe Swinson. A catastrophe, utter Brexitastrophe. And why? I think it was because she was just, paranoid about, I don't know. I don't want to go down the route of why she made that call. It was a catastrophe. The only solution was for the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, the moderates in both camps, to make a deal. That's why I voted for Thread Davy to be the leader. I didn't think Jo Swinson had the intellectual gravitas to realise that. She has her own issues going on and her own interests, which is largely feminism. She wants to promote women. Well, great, do your feminist stuff, but not at the risk of losing our country's membership of the European Union. So what I've been doing in Cambridge is relevant to this, because I've been looking at political economy. Now, from the Labour side, why didn't Jeremy Corbyn agree to work with the Lib Dems? It was both sides were to blame. I've been working on the reconciliation of Liberal and Labour ideology, if you want, behind the scenes, and green thinking. As a political scientist, so now I'm changing my hat. I'm putting political philosophy and political economics on. And in my work, I've been doing a commentary on Das Kapital. Some of you know this. My mother was a Marxist and always said, all the answers are in Das Kapital. So calling her bluff, I'm now reading, every single line and commenting on it in depth. It's on my Green University website. And lo and behold, I've discovered a huge gap in Marxist theory, which I didn't realise before. Nobody's told me. I mean, I don't know if people worked this out before, but Marx's argument in Das Kapital is that capital accrues in the history of modern economics when industrialism kicks in. The Industrial Revolution happens, factories start happening, steam engines start pumping out huge power. They're applied to manufacturing and clothes and all kinds of things, potteries, they all become mechanised. Now, this is a good thing, says Marx, because more things can be produced with the Industrial Revolution, which happened to begin with in Britain, and was a product of British engineering skills. But the trouble is that the capitalists owned the factories and exploited the workers, who then ended up leaving their rural lifestyles, coming into the cities and working for a pittance in the factories, still very poor and impoverished, now living in cramped, unhygienic, unhealthy conditions, and being exploited by the factory owners. And he documents this in great detail, the horrors. Engels also, in his book, The Condition of the Working Class in England, based on his observations in Manchester, which influenced Marx, was also aware of it. He was a factory owner and an industrialist up in Manchester. His father owned a big factory that he became the boss of. So they had a conscience, and Marx himself came from a fairly well-to-do background. One of his relatives became a banker at Coutts Bank in London, the city of London, and later employed the young Ian Fleming, who went on to write the James Bond stories. And that was a relative of Karl Marx, who was his boss in the bank where Fleming worked. That's in the 20th century. So, the Marx dynasty were not poor. Marx had a conscience as an intellectual, and he was desperately trying to work out why capital had created this industrial revolution, was having such a negative effect on people's lives. And he was an activist like me. He saw the poor of Germany and Britain and France, and he bled for them, And he ended up being poor himself because he was so devoted to his studies that he wouldn't give them up and go and, take a normal job in a bank like most of his family were doing. And hats off to him for that, because of his intellectual courage, and to his wife especially, Jenny Weishaupt, who made it possible. Sorry, Jenny von Westphalen, who made it possible. So bless them. But he got his facts wrong. And this is what I've discovered about Marx, I'm sharing with you now. And Marxist thinkers, have very few of them have picked up on this. Marx was right in highlighting the importance of the Industrial Revolution. In Das Kapital, he gives detailed descriptions of the impact of mechanization on different trades and production processes. And he talks about how, say, making clothes or shawls or whatever changed from handicrafts to mass production. And he's brilliant at that. What he then says is that, well, the solution is to nationalise the factories, nationalise the means of production, so that then everyone can own it, we can own it together as a society, as a state, and we can all benefit from it, as happened in Eastern Europe under the communist system and in the Soviet Union in the old days. So then we can have free, everyone can have a job for life, you're guaranteed certain rights and so on. What Marx didn't realise and didn't factor in, and this is why the East European dream crashed, is he didn't realise that capitalism has an investment in war technology. This is the missing bit. What I've realised doing the research is that Marx never mentions the war industries in his analysis of the growth of capitalism. He never realises that it's in the war industries that the cutting edge of scientific and technological research is happening. Things like our mobile phones, our computers, our internet, our satellites that take images and so on. These are spin-offs of the military industrial complex. And they're inventions of the military that then are trickled down to us peasants in normal society, as little party bag tricks that we can take home. The military still has technology that we don't know about, and it's always been that way. So this is why so many people who have advanced degrees in science and technology end up working for the military, as they did for the Manhattan Project in World War II. Well, they're working on the same now, the next generation of superweapons. As my friend Steve Wright found out, a great peace researcher from Leeds, who tragically died in the last few months, and I lament him. Thank you, Steve, for your work. He penetrated the arms companies by going in disguise as if he was an arms manufacturer. He then was invited to arms sales expositions around the world, and he was therefore able to get in and see what they were selling. And he shared this at conferences I was at in the Philippines and elsewhere. The kind of range of equipment that is so sophisticated, ray guns that can take out dissenters, all kinds of high-tech gizmos that are being invented by the military-industrial complex that aren't on general release, but they're being shown at these arms fairs. And tragically, that brilliant mind is now dead. The point I'm making is that Marx should have dedicated a whole volume to the impact of military-industrial technologies development and its symbiosis with capitalism. Because the big capitalist entrepreneurs of the 19th century and the 20th century were also in bed with the arms dealers and the arms manufacturers. And if you look at the history of the arms trade and the arms development in Germany, in Italy, in France, in Russia, in Britain, in America, they're in league with the big capitalists, the big banks, and they profit when World War I broke out. They profited when German reunification battles were happening, when Italian unification were happening. They profit when imperialism was going off and creating the British Empire. They profited when the Germans tried to get in on the act and started trying to catch up. And they profited, cynically and tragically when World War I broke out, to the extent that some Scottish historians now say they actually engineered World War I because they knew it would be good for profits. And they then profited from World War II because they'd funded the rebirth of German armaments, and they were looking forward to, another great chance to get the profits in. So this is a critical, cynical, but realistic perspective. We need to rewrite the history of the 19th and 20th centuries from the perspective of the economic growth of the arms industry and its links to the big banking sector and big capitalism, you will find they're hand in glove. They're like symbiotic shadows of one another. Now, why doesn't Marx mention this? The single biggest industry on the planet is the arms trade. It's the biggest part of the budget of most nations, and yet, complete silence from Marx. Well, it's a mystery. Some socialists said Marx was planted into the socialist movement in order to kill it from within. Proudhon called him the tapeworm of socialism, which is a bit of a nasty metaphor. He suspected him of being like a double agent all along, and he was there with his Germanic pedantry to kind of, I'm right, everyone's wrong. Proudhon actually wrote a book about the economics of war and peace, but his voice was hushed and shushed, and Marxists became, the big thing. And the other thing about Marx that we should bear in mind is that he had a romantic attachment to war. Engels had actually gone off and fought in the German Revolution. Marx and Engels liked military history. They studied battles and they loved military history, and they had a very romantic attachment to war. Very, 18th, 19th century romanticism. Don't forget, Marx was happy to be a duelist. He wasn't a pacifist at all. He used to like fighting with either words or ideas or in actual swords, And he had this romantic idea that, well, no, the military is good, but we must make it the people's military. So when the working class sees power, we'll rearm the military as the working class militia, and then we'll use it to fight wars against all the evil capitalists. And this idea was there in the revolutionary traditions of Paris. The citizens' army, which the French revolutionaries supported, they saw as a tool of progress. The trouble is, if you tried to go and talk to the people in Brittany or in the west of France, no, this was a tyrannical force sent by Robespierre and the revolutionaries in Paris to suppress their risings in the Vendée, where they were trying to just say, well, we just want to go on being peasants with our traditional beliefs and Catholicism, and what's wrong with the monarch? No, we don't like this terror thing you're doing in Paris. Well, the response of the French Revolutionary Army was to march these what were called infernal columns through the territories that were trying to break away and kill everything in sight. They took to massacring people by dropping them off barges into the Loire, and thousands of people were killed. It was a reign of terror by the French Revolutionary Army against the French people, mercilessly conducted and hushed up pretty much ever since, although historians who've actually studied this, Simon Sharman, his good book Citizens, talks about this in his critical history of the French Revolution. Now, so Marx kind of, I don't know that he knew the details of all that, but he knew that revolutions have to use bloodshed, in his view. And he thought, well, if it's a socialist revolution, a communist revolution, then it's fine that we have the revolutionary army because it'll be good. And he seemed to think that the only way that the communist victory would happen is through a huge war. So they thought militarily. Now, I don't. I'm a peace druid of Europe. I'm a pacifist who believes in working to the bottom of what's making for war and putting it out. There's a fire burning deep down in the peat, as Adam Curl used to say, professor of peace studies at Bradford. We have to put the fire deep down in the peat out, or it's going to keep flooding and flashing up. And one of the key things is the arms trade, the military-industrial complex, active in the 18th, 19th, 20th, and now 21st centuries. I was sick to watch Philip May sit next to Theresa May and authorise the bombing of a Syrian scientific research institute using missiles that his company is funding, because it's good for business, it's good for his company, it's good for capital investments. And, they've hijacked my country and its politics in order to promote their war industries and their war activities and capitalism, essentially. So, hang on, why doesn't Corbyn know all this? What's the matter with the Labour Party? Where's the Labour Research Department? Where's the equivalent of Leonard Woolf, who was a great Labour intellectual, who was married to Virginia Woolf, one of my mother's heroes? Where's the people of the calibre of John Smith, who was a great Labour intellectual? Where's people like Gateskill, who, you can say what you want, but he was a clever chap? Where's people like Clem Attlee, who was a clever guy? what's going on? I mean, have they all been put to sleep? Has some kind of drug been slipped into their pudding at night? I don't know. But what I'm trying to do, and the reason I was in Cambridge in the economics faculty, the Marshall Library, is trying to check on who in the history of Marxist philosophy has realised this lacuna in Marx's work. Who in the history of socialist political economy has actually looked at this? And indeed in the history of liberal thinking. You know, the liberals on the whole are supposed to be on the side of peace. That's what they trumpet in their manifestos. That's why good people support the Lib Dems and good people support Labour. You know, the Labour Party had a brilliant manifesto, all for peace. But unless we actually come to grips intellectually with the causes of war, unless we realise this nefarious deal between capital and the war industry, we won't, you know, we'll just be dealing with the surface, not putting out the fire in the peat. So that's what I've been up to in Cambridge, and I've discovered lots of very interesting stuff to do with political economics. And there have been Marxist thinkers who've been realising this. One of them was Rosa Luxemburg, who was one of my mother's heroes. She was a great German Jewish intellectual. She wrote about the economics of imperialism, and she realised that capitalism develops to a point where it has to, you know, go off and conquer nations abroad. It has to develop imperialism as a policy in order to maximise profits, sucks in cheap resources from abroad, either labour or raw materials, and that's how capitalism can thrive. And she did sort of talk about the war industry a bit in that, but not in depth. And unfortunately she was murdered by a right-wing mob in the streets of Berlin with her partner Karl Liebknecht, you know, after the German war effort collapsed, and they were trying to build an alternative socialist Germany, and the response of the right wingers was just kill them to death, you know. So her brain was snuffed out, and since then other intellectuals on the left have thought through the political economy of the war machine and what to do about it. But this is a huge job, you know. Professors in every single economics faculty around the world, if they all got together and began to think this through, looked at the Marxist, looked at the other economic traditions, looked at liberalism, you know, it's not in anybody's interest to have this vast war machine, which now is doing information and communication war, and is very skillfully manipulating things so that wars continue. You know, they've nearly engineered a war against Iran, for God's sake, an ancient and noble culture. And the arms trade people and the military intelligence people and the American, you know, espionage and British espionage, they've now gone into the business of war creation. This is like a whole new ball game, right? Because if my analysis is correct, and the military-industrial complex and the war inventors and developers periodically want a war to try out their kit, well then, you know, we, society, the people, call us socialists or just call us society, world society, as John Burton used to call it, have to come together and oppose this crazy, dark element that's trying to take control of our planet. And we need all the theorists we can get. So Marxists, liberals, Greens are all welcome to this. And even genuine conservatives. You know, there are some conservatives that don't like war. There are some conservatives that want to conserve stuff, that want to protect the environment, want to protect nature, want to protect societies and villages and life, you know, in its fullness and richness. Genuine conservatives aren't warmongers. And genuine conservatives, if they realise what the military-industrial complex have been doing, creating their fake wars, they'd be utterly shocked, you know. And I'm talking people like Wordsworth and Walter Scott, the old school Tories that used to have a brain and a conscience and a heart. So political economics, very important. I was researching in Cambridge, and I was thinking, well, you know, who's done an analysis of Brexit as a political economist? The first professor of Cambridge who really built the school of economics and political economics was Alfred Marshall, a great economist. Well, in that tradition, one of his successors, Pigou, did a work on the economics of war and peace. And one of my other heroes, Lionel Robbins, after whom the library at the LSE is named, which is where I studied during my degree, and my children went to nursery at the LSE. Lionel Robbins wrote a book on the economic causes of war. But I don't think any of these people realise that we'd be here in the 21st century with the world in danger of self-destruction through accidental nuclear war triggered by the greed and self-interests of the arms trade. And now it's all mechanised and robotised, and it could happen through a computer malfunction, like, by the time I've uploaded this video. That's what we have to stop, that possibility. And this is about human beings taking control again of our world from these mechanised dark forces of robotised mass killing. And no, and Brexit seems to me is the same thing. It's the same people have created it, the fake warmongers and the fake dark intelligence sources who militarised information and are set in a mindset of winning and losing. People like Steve Bannon, he wants to win. He's a Cold War warrior who's still fighting whatever he can find to fight, and Brexit was just a cause that he hijacked and creating Cambridge Analytica. He's clever enough to work it. And he also created World of Warcraft. To him, it's a war game. Well, we've got to grow out of that. That's what adolescents do. They play war games. I did that when I was a kid. We have to grow up and become peace thinkers and visionaries, because you realise, when I went to work in hospitals and nurse Canadian veterans, I realised war actually, it cripples people. It leaves them with amputated legs. It leaves them with broken hearts and broken minds. And millions of people around the world. So I dedicated my life to stopping World War III. People like Steve Bannon seem to be gaming. No, it's going to happen. We're going to win. No, we have to go beyond that win-win, that win-lose kind of approach. It's unintelligent. The only win-win solution for this planet is peace. That's what I've said again and again, and I'll say it again till the cows come home, because... And the EU was devised as part of that win-win scenario, the peace scenario. And that's why it's so retrograde of poor old little UK thinking it's going to sod that, we're off. They're playing into the hands of the devil, my friends. And foolish. Okay, so I want to talk about constitutional consequences. So that's where we are. They're going to do it, and they've hijacked the Commons so they can get away with it. The Lords trying to stop it, can't. Privy Council silenced. They can't stop it. So what do we, the people, do? Well, the people of Scotland, bless them, are out in force, marching around. They're going to investigate every single possible legal channel to have their second referendum or declare, universal Declaration of Independence, whatever their route they're exploring. Nicola Sturgeon and her lawyers and her... there are some good people north of the border. I lived in Scotland for 7 years, and I now support Scottish independence. I realise with horror it's the only way for Scotland to get free and get out of this ridiculous Westminster lying machine. And so there's a constitutional crisis going on, as Ian Blackford rightly pointed out in the Commons. I think what we need is a constitutional convention, my friends, for the UK. I think Westminster no longer has moral authority in my country. The Tory-run Westminster Parliament is a sham. It's a corrupt little dictatorship machine. Personally, I think that the riding over the wishes of the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Ireland assemblies is a scandal. And I think that there needs to be a new relationship between the four parts of the UK recalibrated if they're going to remain together. There's only two solutions here. There's either it breaks up, they go their own way, or they stay together and we recalibrate the constitution. As part of that deal is obviously a second referendum on whether all the parts of the UK want to leave the European Union. And if not, then none of them should, if they want to stay together. If a part wants to leave, then it should also have to leave the United Kingdom. That's the deal that should be on the table. I think that foreign interference in British democracy should be outlawed, and our intelligence team at GCHQ have to really up their game. You have to be able to work out, when stuff is coming from Russia or America or wherever, Saudi or Israel or any foreign country trying to interfere in British democracy should be outlawed, should be blocked at entry. And the geeks need to get their act together and work on that. I think the House of Lords needs, and this would be what I would say in the Constitutional Convention, I think the House of Lords needs to be rebranded, reinvented as a Senate of the Nations. It needs to be abolished in its present form. The Lords are wonderful people. I know them well. I was once nominated for the Lords, and I've run 30 meetings in committee rooms in the House of Lords. I have some very good friends who are Lords and ladies, but in that form its time is served. And I think it should be a Senate of the Nations. It should have representation from each of the 4 country constituents of the UK. And it's from that chamber that the government and cabinet of the UK as a whole should be taken. The Commons should become the English Parliament and should only deal with English policy. The Senate of the Nations should watch for the United Kingdom policy. And each country member should have a proportionate say in the way that the UN General Assembly has. So they should have an equal say, in my opinion. This lording it over everyone by the English should stop. It's as simple as that. And the policy of the governments that would form in the Senate of the Nations would be much more peace-oriented, genuinely intelligent, and concerned about not all the real crises that are affecting the country, like poverty, unemployment, social development, environmental issues, housing shortage, etc. And as remaining or rejoining the EU would be, I think, one of the key policies to be developed. Okay, so why is nobody saying this? I don't know. Where is everyone? Are they all asleep? I mean, I know lots of amazing people in Britain, and there are some great thinkers like A.C. Grayling, and there are some great intellectuals posting stuff on the channels and things. I seem to be the only guy that's written a really detailed critique of Brexit from a Bremain Studies Centre I've created here in France and Britain. What's the intellectual response to all this catastrophe supposed to be? I think one thing that's interesting is that both Brexit and Bremain, we come from the romantic tradition in political thought. This is why it's been a battle of the heart as well as the mind. Romanticism was a very important movement from about the 1780s through to the 19th century, and really it's never gone away. But at its peak, it was the early 19th century. And it emphasised heart, feeling, emotion, spirituality, spirit. People like Schelling, great thinkers in Germany, Coleridge in Britain, said that man is not just rational, he is also a feeling person. And so theories have to appeal to that. Romance is the word related to romanticism, means to love, to have the heart engaged. Now, there's 2 brands of romanticism, I think, and this is a very brief analysis. There's romanticism fed into nationalism. The 19th century was this nationalist ideal that we, the people of whatever, Hungary or Poland or Italy or whatever country, Ireland, we all share a common language, we share a common heart. We, the people of our nation, deserve to rise up and be counted. And it became the done thing to be a nationalist. And this then led on, tragically, in the 20th century into, what was a sort of benign form of nationalism in the 19th century, seemed kind of morally okay, became a bit of a heavy brew in the 20th century and led to fascism, Italian nationalism. It led to Nazism, German nationalism. And that's still around, you see. And to me, what Brexit is, it's a flourishing of that right-wing romanticism, British nationalism, which is actually English nationalism, in fact, which has resurged as this kind of right-wing populism. And we have to study its history. You have to realise where it's come from. It hasn't just come out of the blue. It's been there all along. It's there in American romantic right-wing nationalism, the Republican, vowing to the flag. And it's there in